In the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Loki is both a villain and a hero, a tragic figure whose story is one of rejection, jealousy, identity, loneliness, and of course, epic cosmic battles. Here are a few of the more tragic details about Marvel's Loki. Loki was a child of war, born in the thick of a violent conflict between realms that had been going on for eons. Around 965 AD on Earth's calendar, the Asgardian king Odin seemed to finally wrap up the war between his people and the frost giants of Jotunheim. Things didn't really stop there, though, thanks to a fateful discovery made by Odin after the final battle. Entering an empty temple, he found a small baby on an altar. Unlike the other frost giant children, however, this one was small and weak. The child was the son of Laufey, the frost giant king who was unwilling to raise such a child. So Odin adopted the baby, named him Loki, and cast a powerful enchantment to conceal his distinctive blue skin and red eyes. It's pretty easy to see why all this would mess somebody up. Indeed, many people who are adopted develop anxieties centering on their abandonment, even if their biological and adopted families are loving and transparent. Worse still, Odin chose a path for Loki that ultimately compounded this trauma. He raised Loki as his biological son, never telling him or his brother Thor the truth about his birth. When Loki inevitably discovers his actual heritage, well, let's just say it doesn't go well.
Because no matter how much you claim to love me, you're gonna never have a frost giant sitting on the throne of Asgard.
At first, moviegoers may be fooled into thinking Odin is a noble leader and a good father, but it doesn't take long for his deception to fall away. Over the course of the MCU's timeline, it becomes clear that Odin's life is rife with shocking mistakes. Likewise, his parenting style leaves a lot to be desired. Some might even argue that Odin could be one of the biggest villains of the Thor movie franchise. Not only did he essentially steal baby Loki and conceal his identity, but he kept quiet about the fact that he had another daughter, Hela, and look how she turned out.
Kneel before me and rise into the ranks of my great conquest.
On top of that, rather than confront the fact that his parenting produced a full-blown supervillain, Odin instead kicked the can down the road and locked her away in another realm. Even when Odin finally reveals that he adopted Loki, he points out that it wasn't because he was moved out of love or even pity. Instead, he had hoped that Loki would be a useful puppet if Odin could get him on the throne of Jotunheim. At that point, Loki's already precarious sense of belonging comes crashing down right alongside his own shattered identity. Odin's response? To fall into a convenient Odin sleep, of course, where he gets to quietly lay in bed and ignore his problems while everyone else deals with his terrible choices. Though many like to point to Frigga, Odin's wife, as the one adopted parent who actually cared for Loki, their relationship has its dark side too. Remember that she was in on the plot the whole time and kept up Odin's ruse even while it was clear that Loki was struggling through a troubled, isolated childhood. And sure, she briefly mentions that she was against it all in the first Thor movie, but that didn't stop her keeping quiet, did it? Even her love for Loki seems to have had its manipulative side. When Loki later denounces Odin as his father, Frigga turns it around and asks if she is no longer his mother, too. But this question is more meant as a way of bolstering her own position as mother than it is to support her struggling son. A braver parent might have revealed the truth far sooner and perhaps even headed off all the chaos that Loki left in his wake. Loki is a god who lives between many different worlds. He is, of course, stuck between two literal worlds, those of Jotunheim and Asgard. However, Loki's dual nature also seeped into other aspects of his personality and upbringing, often in ways that isolated him further. For example, Loki's propensity for magic comes directly from his adoptive mother. Frigga taught Loki everything about magic, making it a central part of their relationship. Magic in the MCU is frequently coded as feminine, much as it is in many real-world societies. Magical practitioners embody characteristics that, rightfully or not, are often read as feminine, such as a high degree of emotion or empathy. Tricksters, meanwhile, are often portrayed as inherently contradictory. They're seen as both good and evil, helpful and harmful, feminine and masculine both.
How was I supposed to know? I can't see into the future, I'm not a witch.
No? Why'd you dress like one?
So what does this all mean? Well, as both a trickster and a magic user, it means that Loki would already be considered strange and perhaps even undesirable, even if he were a natural-born Asgardian. It can't have made for an easy upbringing. It's widely acknowledged that trauma is no excuse for abusive behavior, and that goes for somebody's relationship with their family members, their friends, and the world at large. This means that Loki bears a certain level of responsibility for his actions as an adult, despite enduring a clearly distressing childhood. But there's another layer of complexity at work in the 2012 movie The Avengers, when Loki is apparently at his most evil. In an apparent retcon made in 2018, Marvel quietly updated Loki's official character biography to indicate that he was actually under some level of mind control the whole time.
Surprise!
The new bio read, "Gifted with a scepter that acted as a mind control device, Loki would be able to influence others. Unbeknownst to him, the scepter was also influencing him. fueling his hatred over his brother Thor and the inhabitants of Earth. Throughout the movie, Loki is seen sporting the now infamous scepter, which is later revealed to contain the Mind Stone. This particular Infinity Stone has the ability to subtly manipulate the mind even when nobody is wielding it, and so it amplified Loki's worst aspects, leading him further down this darkest of paths. Of course, Thanos likely knew full well this would happen when he gave Loki the scepter. This basically means that even when he thought he was finally free, Loki was simply being used as a political pawn by somebody far more powerful than himself. Sound familiar? After he's apprehended at the end of the Avengers, Loki is whisked away to a solitary confinement cell on Asgard. To be fair, at this point in the MCU, Loki is one of the most dangerous criminals in the universe. He'd already tried to upend Asgard, nearly taken over Earth, and teamed up with Thanos to boot. But was solitary confinement for all eternity really an appropriate sentence? This sort of living arrangement can be incredibly punishing, especially for people who are already suffering from social and mental problems. In the real world, many solitary cells are about 80 square feet and bare of anything but essentials, and inmates typically only get an hour of exercise outside each day. This sort of intense isolation can produce extreme results in prisoners, who might suffer from paranoia, hallucinations, panic attacks, obsessive thoughts, and memory problems, among many other issues. For inmates who are already suffering from mental illnesses and social disorders, the effects of solitary confinement can be all the more crippling. Mental illnesses also appear to make inmates more likely to be placed into this type of cell. Some have even gone so far as to call it torture, and while Loki at least seemed to have a little more space in his cell, it's clear that the prospect of being stuck there for the rest of his life probably didn't help his mental state. It probably wouldn't have made for a particularly gripping scene, but you can't help but think a lot of trouble might have been avoided if Asgard had a decent therapist or two. And of course, Loki isn't the only Asgardian who would have benefited from a little professional help. Certainly, Thor himself could probably have done with some therapy. Even though he's the apparent favorite of Odin, he's received little true guidance from his father throughout his life. And by the beginning of Thor, he's basically an egotistical monster who's willing to go to war with Jotunheim over his pride. By the time Avengers Endgame rolls around, Thor has matured greatly, but is traumatized by having lost his family, his world, and his people to Thanos. It's played for laughs in the film, but Thor's pain shouldn't be dismissed, and it's clearly a sign that even the most well-regarded of Asgard needs some help.
Yeah, the only thing that is permanent in life is impermanence.
Awesome. Eggs? Breakfast?
No, I'd like a Bloody Mary.
And so it goes for Thor's little brother. Having been under the impression he was Asgardian for 1,500 years by the time of the first Thor film, Loki ends up in the midst of a pretty understandable identity crisis. And although it may not have solved the problem, some good therapy might have at least helped him manage all that rage and grief. Even when it comes to ruling his kingdom, Odin really isn't as great as the films initially lead you to believe.
Odin, proud to have it, shamed of how he got it.
Odin is a warmonger who built his empire on blood and conquest. He steals away at least one baby for political purposes, of course, but he also banishes his children left and right, whether it was Hela for her treachery or Thor for his ego. However, by the time the MCU's timeline gets going, it at least appears that Asgard itself is doing okay under his rule. When Loki secretly takes over Odin's kingship at the end of the Dark World, he seems to have governed competently enough too, if a little lavishly. And okay, maybe there are a few problems with Loki's rule. It's based on deceit, for one, given that he's impersonating the true king after having placed him in a retirement home on Earth. There are also a few hints suggesting that Loki's Asgard may have an authoritarian edge to it, such as Heimdall's run-in with charges of treason. Still, the fact that no one actually caught on indicates one of two things. Either everyone on Asgard has absolutely zero sense of political acuity, or Loki did at least well enough to evade detection. Sadly, not much else is known about this era in Asgardian history, but it'd be interesting to find out a little more about life under Loki's rule. It might not be what you'd expect. Ragnarok, the world-ending series of events that eventually led to the destruction of Asgard, is often blamed on Loki, and in some ways that's fair enough. In the original Norse myth, for example, the trickster god is absolutely responsible for the end of the world, and even the most recent comic book version of Ragnarok was the fault of a brutally violent Loki. In the MCU, however, Ragnarok actually turned out to be something of a team effort. In Thor Ragnarok, Loki tosses Surtur's crown into the eternal flame, empowering the fire demon to appear and begin ripping Asgard to pieces. But Loki's not acting alone when he does this. In fact, he does it on behalf of Thor, who has himself realized that Ragnarok has to happen to save the Asgardians and defeat Hela once and for all. In Avengers Infinity War, Loki faces off for the final time with his former collaborator, Thanos. Before the world-decimating Titan does away with him, Loki calls himself Odinson while making meaningful eye contact with Thor.
Prince of Asgard. Odinson.
Loki's story comes full circle in this scene, finally realizing that Odin loved him and that Thor is worth saving. But while Thor may indeed be worth saving, there is a more tragic side to Loki's death in Infinity War. That's because there's no real reckoning here, nor any true acknowledgement of all that went wrong on both sides. This moment gives Thor what he needs, but it doesn't give Loki what he deserves, and totally fails to acknowledge everything that Loki has been through, at Odin's hands, at Thanos' hands, heck, even at Thor's hands. In the end, Loki dies miserably after giving what sounds more like an admission of defeat than it does a moment of genuine self-acceptance. Check out one of our newest videos right here, plus even more grunge videos about your favorite stuff are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.